Extremes abound in the Arctic, a vast region of frozen wilderness where surviving is a never-ending struggle. It is also a mysterious place where odd things occur, some of which are inexplicable. One such mystery was the disappearance of an entire Inuit hamlet on the shores of Angikuni Lake in November 1930. Where life once flourished, there was only an unsettling silence. No bodies, no evidence of struggle. An accomplished fur trapper with years of expertise in the far-flung Canadian wilderness was Joe LaBelle. He was familiar with the locals, the land, and the climate. LaBelle was heading toward an Inuit settlement on Angikuni Lake, a location he had previously visited on a chilly November evening. He anticipated hearing the barking of sled dogs, seeing familiar friends, and feeling the warmth of fireplaces. But something wasn't right as he got closer. Normally bustling with activity, the village was utterly quiet. LaBelle yelled, no answer. He saw a disturbing scene as soon as he entered the town. The cottages and tents remained intact. Inside, weapons and clothing were still there. Fireplaces had burned to embers, and food lay untouched. The contents in a pot of stew that was still hanging over a fire pit had frozen solid, indicating that whatever had happened all at once. There were no footsteps leading out of the village. There were no missing sleds. The whole community seemed to have just disappeared. LaBelle headed into the village graveyard, looking for answers. At that point, he discovered something much more horrifying. Numerous burials had been unearthed. There were no longer any bodies to repose there. The soil was carefully placed on the side of the open graves. Animals and the weather had not disturbed them. They had been emptied. The hairs on LaBelle's neck stood on end. What might have happened? He hurried out of the settlement, fearing that something strange had happened, and went to the closest telegraph station, where he sent the Royal Canadian Mounted Police an urgent distress call. Officers from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police showed up at Angikuni Lake to conduct an investigation. The enigma was only heightened by what they discovered. As LaBelle had said, the village was indeed deserted. There was no indication of disease or violence, and there was no reason why the villagers had abruptly fled. Personal property was unaltered. They had left behind weapons, clothes, and even food supplies, which no Inuit would forsake unless forced to do so. The most unsettling aspect was the absence of sled dogs, which are necessary for Arctic life. Something even more bizarre caught the Mounties' attention as they searched further. Officers claimed to have seen an odd blue light floating over the lake that evening. The faint, spooky glow that seemed to move unnaturally was not like the Northern Lights. Does the disappearance have anything to do with this? The fate of the vanished villagers has been the subject of numerous theories over the years. Some people think that the peasants departed of their own volition, seeking food or a better place to live. However, why would they abandon all of their provisions, including their sled dogs, if they had decided to depart? A hostile attack is suspected by others. Could the villagers have been compelled to leave by another group? If so, what prevented any violence or signs of struggle? A natural disaster, they say. They might have had to leave due to a strong storm or a sudden change in the ice. But the village was completely intact, and there were no indications of destruction. According to Inuit legend, evil spirits that can lure people into the tundra and steal their souls prowl the Arctic. Could something otherworldly have captured the villagers? Then there are some who think of something more stranger. Some others think they may have had an alien encounter because of the odd blue lights they saw above the lake. Could an unidentified force have captured the entire village? Despite searches, the vanished villagers' bodies, bones, or other remains were never located. They never resettled the village. Authorities eventually rejected the enigma as a work of fanciful legend. However, many who have witnessed the deserted graves, the ghostly blue lights, and the deserted community have a different opinion. One of the most terrifying unsolved disappearances in history is still the vanishing village of Angikuni Lake. There is no evidence of the previous occupants, just questions and no answers. Did they voluntarily venture out into the icy night with no intention of coming back? Or were they taken by powers that are incomprehensible to humans? We might never find out. However, you might not be alone if you ever find yourself close to Angikuni Lake and you hear wind-borne murmurs. because some people claim that the vanished folks are still waiting outside. One of the scariest and best researched paranormal cases in American history is the Smurl family haunting. It tormented a diligent family for more than 10 years, leaving more questions than answers in its wake. Skeptics claim it was all in the mind, while others think it was a real demonic invasion. However, the tragedy was quite genuine to those who experienced it. The 4 daughters of Jack and Janet Smurl moved into a duplex in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, in 1973. John and Mary Smurl, Jack's parents, occupied the other half of the house. The house first appeared to be ideal, a peaceful location for 3 generations of family to live together. Strange events quickly revealed that they were not alone, though. It started very quietly. The faucets activated on their own. In several rooms there seemed to be a cold, disagreeable atmosphere. Unidentified sounds reverberated throughout the house, voices whispering in the dead of night, clawing and knocking. Then the commotion intensified. Janet was in the kitchen one evening when the air was filled with a strong, sickening stench that made her gag. There was no source of the odor, and it disappeared as abruptly as it had appeared. Things started to move by themselves. Unaccounted for, huge gouges emerged in the walls, and furniture rocked. Even when no one was home, the family would frequently hear heavy footsteps pacing the house. The noises became more aggressive at night, with loud bangs, thumps, and sudden, guttural growls. The attacks then turned physical. According to Jack Smurl, an invisible force pushed, slapped, and even scratched him. Janet sensed unseen hands pinching her flesh and tugging at her hair. She was unable to move one night while she was in bed because of a big weight that was crushing down on her chest. She felt as though something was attempting to choke her. There were others impacted besides the Smurls. The same traumas were endured by Jack's parents. When no one was there, shadows glided around the walls, lights flickered erratically, and their dog moaned in terror. The entity became more powerful as the months went by. When Jack claimed to have been attacked by an invisible force, it was one of the most horrific incidents. He spoke about an unseen force torturing him as he was pinned down and immobile. For years, he would not talk about the incident because it was so terrible. The Smurls, desperate for answers, sought assistance from the Catholic Church. When priests arrived to bless the house, the chaos only got worse. The gloomy presence persisted, despite the family's daily prayers. They were at their breaking point by 1986. They got in touch with Ed and Lorraine Warren, the well-known paranormal investigators who worked on the Annabelle case and the Amityville horror. When the Warrens arrived to look into it, they quickly verified the Smurls' worst suspicions. A strong demon was among the many beings infesting their house. Lorraine Warren claimed that the devil was quite clever and preyed on the family's anxiety. It tormented everyone inside the duplex as it moved between the 2 sides. Ed Warren tried to provoke the entity during one inquiry. In reaction, despite the windows being closed, a strong wind tore through the house. According to the Warrens, exorcisms were required. The rite was carried out by a priest who gave the spirit the order to depart. The home was silent for a moment. The calm, however, was short-lived. The activity reappeared shortly after the exorcism, but this time it was louder, stronger, and more ferocious. Unable to find solace, the Smurls lived through years of fear. The health of the family started to deteriorate. Jack had melancholy and fatigue. Stress caused Janet to lose weight. At night, their kids were terrified to go to sleep. 13 years of torment later, the Smurls eventually fled the house in 1987. In an attempt to escape the nightmare, they relocated to a new residence. Despite the quietness of the new home, Janet subsequently said that the thing briefly followed them before vanishing. One of the scariest cases in paranormal history is still the haunting of the Smurl family. Some people think a demonic power actually afflicted the family. Others contend that tension and paranoia caused the incidents to be exaggerated. The evil in the house, however, was real, according to those who experienced it. What actually transpired inside the Smurl house is still unknown. The house remains intact, with secrets hidden within its walls that might never be discovered. Maybe whatever was hiding there is still watching and waiting for someone else to move in. One of the most eerie and puzzling unresolved mysteries in American history is the Yuba County Five case. The strange murders and disappearance of 5 young men in 1978, also known as America's Dyatlov Pass Incident, have left scholars and investigators with more questions than answers. The case's peculiar details continue to provoke discussion, conjecture, and speculation. In order to attend a basketball game at California State University Chico, 5 guys from Yuba City, California, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Wire, Gary Mathias, and Jack Madruga, took a quick road trip on the evening of February 24, 1978. The 5 buddies, who were all enrolled in a special education program and had modest mental health conditions or intellectual disabilities, became close through their mutual passion for sports. The following day was their big basketball competition, which they had all been looking forward to. However, they never returned home. Their families realized right away that something was amiss. They would never have missed their game, and these men were accountable. A search was started after days went by with no trace of them. Authorities discovered Madruga's vehicle, a turquoise 1969 Mercury Montego, abandoned on a secluded mountain road in the Plumas National Forest, some 70 miles from their residences. This was the first hint. The keys were gone, the automobile had a quarter tank of gas, and it was unharmed. Strangely, there were no indications that the car had been stuck or that anyone had attempted to force it free, even though the region was covered in deep snow. The males had been last seen wearing sneakers and light coats, utterly unsuitable for the chilly temperatures, according to investigators. The most perplexing question, though, was why they were there in the first place. The place was well out of their way, far from the path they ought to have followed home. They had no reason to be on that lonely road, and none of them were known to like the outdoors. For months, search teams searched the area. The snow-covered countryside was combed by hundreds of volunteers, dogs, and helicopters. However, the men were nowhere to be seen. The case then took a darker turn in June, 4 months after the snow had melted. Forest rangers discovered an abandoned Forest Service trailer deep in the woods, over 20 miles from the location of the automobile. The body of Ted Wire was found inside. The story of his remains was horrifying. He suffered from acute frostbite and had lost almost 100 pounds. He had scrounged food from the trailer's storage and covered himself with layers of sheets. Strangely enough, there was a fireplace inside, but it had never been used, despite the fact that it might have saved his life and given him warmth. The unopened emergency provisions, however, were the most horrifying finding. The majority of the food and supplies in the trailer had not been eaten, but there was enough to last the 5 men for months. Searchers discovered Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling's partially animal-eaten remains in the woods not far from the trailer. Their bodies gave the impression that they had died of the cold while attempting to get assistance. Jack Hewitt's bones were discovered strewn in a neighboring gully a few days later. Gary Mathias, however, was one man who was never located. Near the trailer, just his shoes and a few other items were found. His remains were never found. What happened to the Yuba County Five is still unknown. Theories might be rational or irrational. According to some, the guys were disoriented, became terrified, and ventured far into the forest before perishing from exposure. Some people speculate that they were fleeing from something or someone. Some speculate that they might have been pulled off the road after witnessing anything unlawful. Others doubt Gary Mathias's role. Mathias had schizophrenia, but he had been well controlling it, unlike the others who had intellectual disabilities. Although some have theorized that he might have been involved in whatever transpired that evening, the reality is still unknown given the absence of his body. Was it just a case of 5 men going in the wrong direction, or is there a darker reason at work? The case is still unsolved, more than 40 years later, a terrifying mystery that only leaves room for speculation, questions, and the uncanny emptiness of the Sierra Nevada mountains.